good evening, or perhaps good night. If you've made your way here in the long hours after midnight, the difference may already have stopped mattering. You've come back, perhaps, because the last 2 episodes helped you sleep, or you've come for the first time, and the 3rd episode happened to be the one the algorithm offered. Either is fine. The Almanac is patient. Tonight stands on its own. If you're listening in bed, I'd ask you to do very little. Close your eyes. Let your jaw loosen. Let your shoulders drop, even a little, even if you didn't know they were tight. The story does not need your attention. It will keep moving, whether you follow it or not. If you drift, that is the point. If you wake briefly to catch a single sentence, and then sink again, that is good. In the first episode, we walk the shape of the world. 9 realms joined by one great tree. In the second, we met the Wanderer, the Allfather, the Hanged God. Tonight, we meet the figure who stood between the world of men and the great old powers at its edges, the God of Thunder, the red-bearded one, the one who carried, at his belt, a hammer that had been forged in the underground halls of the dwarves, under conditions so strange they have been told and retold for 1,000 years. This is the story of how that hammer came to be, and of the small cruelty and the long descent and the bet that nearly cost a god's head that lay behind it. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. Thor, the god of the hammer. Before we go to the dwarves, and before we go to the forge, we should sit, for a while, with the figure of the god whose hammer this story is about. Thor. If you have come to Norse mythology through the surface of modern culture, through comic books, through summer blockbuster films, through the cheerful merchandise that fills airport shops near Reykjavik, you may carry, in your mind, a particular picture of him. A tall blonde figure, a square jaw, a red cape, a hammer with a short handle held aloft as lightning strikes around him, a face that smiles easily. The Thor of the Old Norse sources is, in some ways, that figure, and in other ways, not quite that figure at all. He is described in the surviving texts as red-bearded, Raudskeggr, the Redbeard, a man or a god, but the texts often use the language of men for him, of enormous appetite and enormous strength. He eats more than any other being in Asgard. He drinks more. He sleeps deeply. He is, by every account, the strongest of the gods, and one of the few who openly enjoys his own strength. He laughs easily. He grieves easily. He is, in the long view of the surviving stories, the most directly accessible of the Norse gods, the one whose feelings, when he has them, are not hidden behind cunning or grief or many names. He shows you what he feels. The Redbeard, Raudskeggr. The word in Old Norse means exactly what it looks like. The color was, in the old Scandinavian world, not common. Fewer than 1 in 15 people were born with it. And a red beard on a god was the sort of detail the poets did not include by accident. Red was the color of fire, of the smithy, of the moment when iron came out of the coals and could be shaped. It was the color, too, of the lightning that the old farmers in Norway and Sweden saw flicker across summer skies and named for him. The skies in the north were his work. The thunder, the storms that broke open, the long midsummer afternoons, the rain that came after, all of it carried his name, Thorsdagur, Thor's Day. The 5th day of the week, in the Old Norse calendar, was named for him. It still is, in every Germanic language that survives. In English we say Thursday, and most of us no longer remember why. But the name has been carried across 1,000 years by the simple weight of repetition. Children learn it without knowing it is a name. The god of thunder, in this small daily way, has outlived nearly every temple and every ceremony that was ever raised to him, and there is more to him than the lightning. His father, the sources tell us, was Odin, whom we met last episode, the Allfather, the Wanderer, and, in this single particular, the two could not be less alike. The father is the god of hidden things, of long roads, of self-imposed ordeals, of wisdom paid for in body. The son is the god of openness, of feasts, of direct collision with whatever stands in his way. The father goes alone. The son arrives at the gallop on his goat-drawn chariot, with the sky cracking behind him. His mother, in the surviving accounts, was Jord, the earth, sometimes called Lodin or Fjorgen in the older Eddic poems. Thor is, by this lineage, the son of the wanderer god and of the earth itself, sky and ground, joined in a single body, the figure who, in the old Norse world view, was meant to stand exactly at the place where Asgard met Midgard, where the high world of the gods reached down to the world of human farms and human halls. He had a hall of his own. The texts call it Bilskirnir, lightning bright. The hall is said to have had 540 rooms, which is the largest hall in Asgard, larger even than Odin's Valhall. The figure comes to us from Grimnismal, one of the older Eddic poems, and Snorri Sturluson, who, like numbers, preserved it in his prose Edda. Whether it is literal or simply a poet's way of saying immeasurably large is a matter for the listener to decide. He had a wife. Her name was Sif. We will meet her, in earnest, in the next chapter, because she is essential to the story we are walking toward tonight. He had children. The principal ones in the surviving sources were two sons, Magni and Modi, whose names mean, roughly, strength and courage. There is also a daughter, Thrudr, whose name means strength in a different sense, closer to might. The children are mentioned in the sources but rarely take center stage. Thor's stories are, with very few exceptions, Thor's stories, and he had two goats. This is the detail that more than any other separates the Norse Thor from the modern Thor of popular culture. The Norse Thor did not fly. The Norse Thor did not, in the surviving texts, hover above the ground or call down lightning at will from the sky. The Norse Thor moved across the worlds the way most beings moved, on a vehicle, and his vehicle was a chariot pulled by two goats. Their names were Timgrisnir and Tangjoster, which translate, in the rough English the names allow, as tooth-bearer and tooth-grinder. The surviving sources do not, by and large, describe the goats themselves, only their function. They are the animals that pull Thor's chariot. Their names suggest, in the Norse imagination, the kind of bared-teeth countenance one might still meet, today, in the highlands of Iceland or the Faroe Islands, on a path one would not particularly want to share. The goats had a remarkable quality, which I cannot in good conscience leave out of an episode about Thor. They could be eaten and then resurrected. In the Eddic story of Thor's journey to the giant Utgarda Loki, which we will not visit in full tonight, since it deserves its own episode in a later season, Thor and his companions, traveling across the long roads of the world, stop at a peasant's farm for a meal. Thor slaughters his own goats, butchers them, and shares the meat with the family. After eating, he gathers the bones and the goat skins, blesses the hides with his hammer, and the goats stand up alive in the morning. There is no explanation. The text simply records what happened. This image is, in some ways, more telling about Thor than any description of his appearance. The hammer was not only a weapon, the hammer was also, in the Norse imagination, a tool of consecration, a thing one used to bless, a thing that could, when laid on the right thing, restore what had been broken. We will come back to this. What you should keep from this short tour of the god is the shape of the being we are following tonight. He is the son of the wanderer and the earth. He is red-bearded, easily moved, openly strong. He has a hall larger than his father's. He has a wife with golden hair, whom we will meet in the next chapter. He has 2 goats, who pull his chariot across the worlds, and who can be killed and brought back to life. And he has, by the time the surviving stories were written, a hammer, a short-handled hammer. Mjolnir, the crusher, the lightning tool, the defense of the gods, the weapon that, in the old Norse imagination, stood between everything that mattered and everything that wanted to break it. Tonight is the story of how that hammer came to be. And before we go down into the dwarven forges where the hammer was made, we should first meet the figure whose suffering set the whole story in motion. Because the hammer was made by accident. The hammer was made because Loki, the trickster, had done something cruel to Thor's wife. We meet her now. Chapter 2, Sif and the Golden Hair. The wife of Thor was called Sif. This is, on first encounter, a remarkably short name, 2 syllables, almost a sound. In Old Norse, the word Sif means, roughly, kinship, relation by marriage, in-law. In its broadest sense, it is the word for the bonds between people who are not bound by blood, but who are bound, nonetheless, by the structures of family. To be in Sif with someone is to be tied to them by something other than birth. This is, scholars have long noted, an unusual sort of name. Most Norse god names are descriptions. All-Father, Thunder, the Just, the Bright One. Sif's name is, by contrast, almost an abstraction. She is named after the very idea of being in relation. She is, in her name itself, the one who is tied. We know remarkably little about her in the surviving sources. The Norse poets, who lavished long stanzas on the deeds of the male gods, were briefer when they came to the goddesses. Sif appears in the Eddic poems mostly as Thor's wife, the woman waiting in Bilskirnir when he is away on his long journeys. She is not given speeches of her own in the major poems. She is mentioned, briefly, in genealogies. She is, in the old word, Sif, the relation, the tie. But what is consistent, across every surviving reference to her, is the description of her hair. It was gold. Not gold as a color, not blonde, not honey, not flax. Gold. The metal, the substance. The hair of Sif was, in the Norse imagination, literal gold. It fell from her head the way real hair falls. It was warm, and it grew, and it moved in the wind. But it was, by every account, made of gold. This is the kind of detail that the Norse poets allowed to stand without explanation. They did not feel the need to tell us how such a thing was possible. They simply told us it was so. The wife of Thor had hair of gold. It is the principal thing the surviving texts want us to know about her. Why does this matter? In the Norse cultural imagination, hair was not, as it sometimes is in our own age, a casual or decorative thing. Hair was a marker of identity, a marker of social standing, a marker, in particular, of the relationship between a woman and her household. A wife's hair, in the Old Norse world, was bound up tightly during the workday and let down only in private, only with her husband. To touch a married woman's hair was, in the legal codes that survived from the Icelandic settlement, an offense that could be punished. To cut a woman's hair against her will was an offense graver still, close, in the old legal language, to the offense of cutting off a part of her body. And the wife of Thor had hair that was, itself, a treasure, gold, the most precious substance the Norse imagination knew. The hair on her head was, in literal weight and value, the wealth of a kingdom. Hair, in the Old Norse world, was not a small thing. It was not, as it sometimes is in our world, simply a matter of style. A woman's hair, in particular, carried meaning. It was, in the surviving texts, a sign of her honor, of her standing in the household, of her unbroken connection to the family line. A married woman bound her hair, often, beneath a cloth head covering, a symbol of her vows. An unmarried woman wore her hair loose. To cut a woman's hair without her consent, in the old Scandinavian law codes that have survived from later centuries, was an act of grievous insult, a crime that carried a fine roughly equal to the wounding of her father, or her husband, or her brother. To cut a goddess's hair was something the old poets had no measure for at all, and Sif's hair, in the surviving accounts, was not only hers, it was, the poets tell us, gold, real gold, or something the eye could not tell from gold. When she stood in the firelight of her hall, with her hair loose around her shoulders, the light moved through it, the way light moves through a fall of wheat at evening before the harvest. Some of the old commentators have suggested that her hair was the wheat, that Sif was, in the old farmer's understanding, the field itself, ripening, and Thor was the rain that came down upon her. I want you to hold this image for a moment before we move on. A woman sleeping, the wife of the strongest god in the pantheon, in her own hall, her hair spread on the pillow around her, glinting in the low light of the banked hearth fire. Gold, the whole of it. The Norse poets do not tell us, in the surviving texts, much about her inner life. They do not tell us what she thought, or what she did during the days when Thor was away. They do not give her a voice in the major poems. She is named Sif, and she is described gold-haired, and that is, for the most part, what the texts give us. What they do tell us, in clear and lingering detail, is what happened to her one night. While she slept, in the deep middle of the night, in her own hall, in the long quiet of Asgard, someone came to her. The someone, a figure we will meet properly in the next chapter, moved very quietly. The figure approached the bed where she lay. The figure leaned over her, in the dark, while she went on breathing in the rhythm of sleep. And the figure he cut her hair, all of it. The Old Norse verb the surviving sources use, skera, means to cut or to shave, and the texts say he shaved off all of it. The gold fell in long heavy strands, in the dark, onto the floor of the hall. What is consistent across every surviving telling is the central act. Sif, the wife of Thor, woke in the morning to find her hair gone. The Norse poets do not, in the surviving texts, give us her reaction in dialogue. They do not let her speak the words anyone in such a moment might speak. They simply tell us, in the careful, restrained, almost formal language the Norse used for the most painful moments, that she woke and she found, and she was, in their phrase, unconsoled. She was a goddess. She was the wife of the strongest god in the pantheon. She was, by the standards of the Old Norse world, untouchable. And someone had, in the night, come to her and taken from her the one thing the texts repeatedly tell us defined her, She did not speak. In the surviving texts, she wept. And when Thor came home, which he did eventually, as the texts always have him do, returning from one of his long journeys, and found his wife in her hall, with her head bare, weeping, the response of the strongest god in the Norse pantheon was, in its own way, exactly what one would expect. He went to find the figure who had done it. He had, the texts tell us, a fairly good idea of who that figure was, because in the surviving Norse imagination, this kind of cruelty, this kind of small, inexplicable malice, this kind of cutting in the dark while someone slept, this was the work of one specific god, and every other god in Asgard knew it. In the next chapter, we meet him. We meet Loki. Chapter 3, Loki the Trickster. I want to spend some time in this chapter sitting with the figure of Loki, because Loki is, more than almost any other figure in Norse mythology, a being who resists the simple descriptions one might want to apply to him. The modern English word for what Loki is trickster. This is a useful word, and a true one, as far as it goes. Loki is a trickster. He plays tricks. He moves things around. He hides things. He pretends to be other than what he is. He lies when lying serves him. He shapeshifts. He laughs when no one else is laughing. He upends, again and again, what the gods of Asgard would have otherwise been able to settle into. But trickster is, in the modern English ear, often a softer word than the Norse texts mean. The trickster of the modern imagination, the figure in fables, the prankster, the funny uncle of a pantheon, is a figure of mostly harmless mischief. The trickster in the modern sense is someone you can, in the end, laugh along with. Loki is, sometimes, that figure. The Norse texts certainly let him be that figure when they want him to be. There are stories in the corpus in which Loki's trick saved the gods, or at least saved them money, or rescued them from situations they could not have escaped on their own. In one of the more famous of these stories, which we will arrive at in its own time in a later season, Loki turns himself into a mare in order to distract the great workhorse of a giant builder, and the gods escape the giant's bargain because of it. The trick costs Asgard nothing. The trick produces, as a side effect, the 8-legged horse Sleipnir, which we met last episode. The trick, in the end, was good for the gods, but Loki is also, sometimes, something else. He is the figure who, in the surviving end-of-the-world poetry of the Norse, the Völuspá, leads the army of the dead against Asgard on the last day. He is the figure who, by the end of the surviving cycle of stories, has been chained to a stone in a cave, with a venomous serpent dripping poison onto his face, in punishment for crimes the gods could no longer overlook. He is the figure whose children, in the surviving genealogies, are the wolf that swallows Odin, the serpent that fights Thor, and the half-rotted woman who keeps the underworld of the dead. Loki is not, in the long view, a harmless prankster. Loki is, in the long view, the agent of the gods' ending. This is the problem of Loki. He is both at once. He is the helpful trickster and the eventual enemy, the same being. The Norse texts do not, I think, fully resolve this. They simply allow both to be true. Loki is one of the strangest figures in any mythology that has ever survived. The other gods of the North, Odin, Thor, Freyr, Freya, Tyr, sit, more or less, in the seats that mythologies usually have. The wise one, the strong one, the fertile one, the brave one. Loki sits in none of them. He is, in the surviving sources, not a god of anything in particular. He has no temples that we know of. He has no day of the week. He has no festival, no ritual, no farmer's prayer raised to him at the turning of the season. And yet he is everywhere in the stories. Every great story of the Norse gods, the building of Asgard's walls, the death of Balder, the binding of Fenrir, the recovery of Thor's hammer when it was later stolen, the very ending of the world at Ragnarok, has Loki at its center. He is the figure, the old commentators have suggested, who makes the stories move. Without him, the gods would sit in their halls and feast forever. Nothing would happen. With him, every door is opened that the gods did not mean to open. Every wager is offered that the gods did not mean to take. Every crime is committed that the gods did not, until then, know was possible. And he was, in the old sources, blood brother to Odin. A blood brother, sworn, bound by oath. Who is he, in his nature? The surviving sources give us several pieces. They tell us he is not, properly speaking, a god of the Aesir. He was born among the giants. His father was Farbauti, cruel striker, and his mother was Laufey, sometimes called Nal, who may or may not have been a goddess. He was brought into Asgard, the texts tell us, through a blood brotherhood with Odin. The two gods, in a moment not preserved in detail in the surviving sources, swore brotherhood by mingling their blood. From that moment, Loki was of the Aesir, in the legal sense of the Old Norse world. He could not be expelled. He could not be killed by the gods. He had the same standing among them as any born god, but he was not ever quite one of them. The texts return to this again and again. Loki is in Asgard, but not of it. Loki sits at the gods' tables, but is not, in some deeper sense, at the gods' table. Loki is a guest who never quite leaves. And he is, the texts are clear, a being of changing shape. This is one of the most consistent features of his character. He becomes a mare, as we mentioned. He becomes, in another story, a falcon, borrowing the feather cloak of the goddess Freya to fly between the worlds. He becomes, in still another story, a salmon, trying to hide from the gods in a river after a particularly bad piece of work. He becomes, the texts tell us, a fly, when he needs to be small enough to get into places he could not otherwise reach. He becomes an old woman when he needs to weep beside a goddess's coffin and refuse to grant the tear that would release her from the underworld. The shapes are many. There is no surviving source that tells us, in clear language, what Loki is in his most basic form. The texts do not give us a definitive description. He is described, when he is described at all, as fair-faced, quick, slim, with a slightly cruel mouth. Beyond that, the sources let his appearance shift with his moods. And he is, and this is the part of his character that matters most for tonight's episode, moved, often, by a kind of malice that does not have an obvious source. The Norse texts are honest about this. In a way, the surviving Greek and Roman texts about their own gods sometimes are not. The Greek gods, when they are cruel for reasons. They want something. They are punishing someone. They are settling a score. Loki is not always like that. Loki sometimes does cruel things for no reason the text can fully explain. He does them, the surviving phrase often suggests, because the chance presented itself, because he saw a way to disturb something that was otherwise still, because the cruelty was, in the moment, available. This is the Loki who, the surviving texts tell us, came to Sif's bed in the middle of the night. The texts do not give him a motive. The texts do not tell us he was angry at Sif. The texts do not tell us he had quarreled with Thor. The texts do not tell us he was acting on behalf of anyone else. The surviving phrase in Snorri's prose Edda is, in its bare Old Norse, Loki laufe Jarson, Hafti, that gjør til Levisi at skera har alt a Sif. In Anthony Fawkes' standard modern translation, Loki Laufey's son had done this out of mischief, had cut off all of Sif's hair, out of mischief, til Levisi, out of cunning malice. The Norse word Levisi carries a darker weight than the modern English mischief. It is closer to intentional harm done because one is the kind of being who does intentional harm. It is the malice of a creature who recognizes that another creature is sleeping safely and who chooses, in that moment, to do something to break the safety. This is the Loki we are dealing with tonight. He is not, in this story, the trickster who saves Asgard from a costly bargain. He is the trickster who, for no reason the surviving texts can fully explain, came in the night to the wife of his blood brother's son, and cut from her head the gold hair she had been known by for as long as anyone in Asgard could remember. And then, when he was caught, he had to set right what he had done. We turn now to the cutting itself and to what followed. Chapter 4. The Cutting. I want to begin this chapter by telling you what the surviving sources do not give us. They do not give us, in any version of the story I have been able to find, the scene of the cutting itself. Snorri Sturluson, who is by far our most detailed source for this story, gives us only the bare fact. Loki had done this out of malice, had cut off all of Sif's hair. The act is named, and the chapter moves on. This is, in the way of Norse literature, the customary restraint. The Norse poets did not, by and large, linger in their most painful moments. They told you what had been done, and they trusted you, the listener, to do the rest of the imagining. The work of the imagination was understood to be the work of the audience. The poet's job was to give the bone. The audience's job was to put the flesh on it. So I will not, tonight, give you an invented scene of the cutting. I will not give you Loki's face in the dark, or Sif's breathing in the bed, or the weight of the gold strands in his hand. The sources do not give them to me, and to invent them feels like a betrayal of the text's chosen restraint. The story does not tell us why he did it. This is, we should pause here for a moment, one of the marks of these old stories that the modern reader sometimes finds difficult. We are used, in our novels and our films, to motivation being supplied. A character does a thing, and the writer tells us why. The Norse poets did not work that way. They told us often what was done. They told us often what the consequences were. They very rarely told us what the person inside the act was thinking. The story is the act and the consequence. The interior is for the listener to fill in, or to leave empty, as they prefer. So we are not told whether Loki cut Sif's hair out of envy, or out of malice, or out of some quarrel with Thor that has not survived in the text. Some of the old commentators have read it as a grudge against Thor specifically, Thor being the god most directly opposed to Loki's tricksterism, the one most likely to threaten violence when Loki crossed the line. Others have read it as something more shapeless, as the sort of small cruelty that some figures, in some old stories, simply perform because the performing of it is its own kind of pleasure. We are not told. We may rest in that. What the sources do give us, and what we can sit with, is what happened next. Thor came home. He had been away. The surviving accounts do not specify where he had been, In this particular story, Thor was often away. The work of being Thor was, in large part, the work of going out, of taking the chariot of goats and the hammer not yet his, and crossing the long road between the worlds, dealing with whatever needed to be dealt with along the way. The defense of Asgard, in the Old Norse imagination, was not a passive thing. It was the work of the strongest god to go, again and again, out into the dark places, and to come back. He came back, the surviving sources tell us, and he found his wife in her hall. Her hair was gone. She was, in the Norse phrase, unconsoled. The word in the original is something close to that. Ohugat, uncomforted, not yet able to be settled. She was, in her own hall, in her own life, in a state from which the ordinary rhythms of being her had been broken. The wife of the strongest god in the pantheon, sitting in her own hall, with her head bare, was a sight that, the surviving texts make very clear, none of the gods of Asgard had seen before. Thor asked her what had happened. She told him. The sources are spare on her dialogue. We do not have her exact words preserved. What we have, in the structure of the narrative, is the shape of her telling. She told him what she could tell him. She told him that someone had come to her in the night. She told him what they had done. She named, by all surviving indications, the figure she suspected. She would not have had to look hard. Every god in Asgard, by every surviving account, would have known. It was Loki. And Thor, the texts tell us in plain and unguarded language, went to find him. This is the moment in the story I want to slow down on, because it is one of the more affecting moments in all of Norse mythology, and the surviving Norse sources do something with it that I find, even at 1,000 years distance, very moving. Thor caught Loki. The catching itself is not described in detail. The texts give us the bare fact. Thor went, Thor found him, Thor caught him. The implication, in the way the sources tell it, is that Loki did not run very hard. He may have tried to talk his way out in his customary fashion. He may have offered explanations. He may have laughed the way he often did when caught doing what he had done. The surviving phrase suggests that whatever Loki tried, it did not work for very long. Thor, and here I will paraphrase Snorri carefully because the passage matters. Thor would have broken every bone in Loki's body, then and there, if Loki had not been very quick about offering an alternative. The phrase Snorri uses is, in Falk's standard translation, Thor caught Loki, and he would have broken every bone in his body, except that he swore an oath. Read the sentence again. He would have broken every bone in his body, except that he swore an oath. This is, in the Norse imagination, the very edge of what Thor was capable of. The strongest god, in the moment of finding the figure who had cut his wife's hair, was, by the source's explicit testimony, about to dismember him in his own body, slowly and completely, not kill him. Killing would have been easier. Thor was, in this moment, in the kind of fury that would have made him take Loki apart, bone by bone, while Loki was still alive to feel it. The oath stopped him. Loki swore, quickly, urgently, in the way one swears when one is about to be unmade, that he would set right what he had done. He would not, by any of his own arts, be able to give Sif her hair back. The hair was gone, and the gold of it lay on the floor of her hall, and even Loki could not make a goddess's own hair grow back overnight. But he swore, and this is the central pivot of the story, that he would get the dwarves, the great metal workers of Svartalfheim, the most skilled smiths in the 9 worlds, to make her a new head of hair of true gold that would grow on her head as if it had always been there. Thor accepted the oath. He did not, the sources tell us, let Loki out of his sight until the work was done. He did not break his bones. He did not unmake him. He stood, the surviving accounts suggest, and watched Loki gather himself, and watched him prepare to descend to the underground country where the dwarves worked, and let him go on the condition that he would return with what he had promised. This is the cutting and what came after: a small cruelty, a great wrath, an oath, and the beginning of a long journey down into the dark places of the world, where the substances that became the great treasures of Asgard were waiting to be made. We follow Loki, now, down into Svartalfheim. Chapter 5. Down to Svartalfheim. The dwarves, in the Norse imagination, lived underground. This is, on first encounter, a familiar enough idea. Most cultures that knew metalworking knew that the substances metalworkers worked with came from underground. Iron from the iron mines, copper from the copper mines, gold, often, from the deep beds of rivers or from the seams of certain mountains. To work metal was, in some sense, to bring up what had been buried. The Norse, like many of their neighbors, put this into mythological form. They imagined a people whose entire life took place underground, a people who had been born in the dark, who lived in the dark, who worked in the dark, a people who had become, by long habit and by the patience of generations, the greatest metal workers any of the worlds knew. These were the dwarves. The name in Old Norse is Dvergar, singular dvergr. The word is related, distantly, to the modern English dwarf, and carries roughly the same meaning. The dwarves were, in the Norse imagination, short of stature, broad of shoulder, long of beard, and, most consistently, very, very skilled. Their realm was called Svartalfheim. We mentioned it briefly in the first episode of this season. Svartalfheim, Black Elf Home, the home of the Dark Elves. The Norse, in some of their sources, conflated dwarves with the Dark Elves, a related group of underground beings, often referred to in the same breath, sometimes as if they were the same people. The scholarly consensus today is that the Norse themselves were not always clear on the distinction. Sometimes dwarves and dark elves were 2 different peoples, sometimes they were one. The sources are, on this point, comfortable with the ambiguity. What is consistent is the geography. Svartalfheim was beneath the worlds of the surface. To go there, one descended. Svartalfheim, sometimes called Nidavellir in the older Eddic poems, sometimes called simply the Dwarf Realm, sits in the Norse cosmology beneath Midgard, below the world of men, beneath the roots of the world tree. It is one of the 9 worlds, though the old sources do not always agree on its exact placement among them. Some texts treat it as part of the same vast underground that contains Helheim, the realm of the dead. Some treat it as a separate underground entirely. The poets did not, in this matter, take great pains to be consistent. The image they meant to convey was simpler than a map. Down, beneath the surface, in the dark, where the things that the gods used were made. The dwarves themselves, in the surviving accounts, are an old people. The Prose Edda, in Snorri Sturluson's telling, says they were born, or, in some readings, that they grew, from the body of Ymir, the first giant, after the gods slew him at the beginning of the world. From his flesh, the maggots, and from those maggots, the dwarves. The texts give the impression of a people who had been in the world from very nearly its beginning, older than the gods, perhaps, in a certain sense, or at least as old. Old, in any case, in the way that very old craftsmen are old. They had been making things in their underground halls for as long as anyone could remember, and what they made, no one else could make. Loki, the surviving sources tell us, went to Svartalfheim. The journey is not described in detail. The Norse poets, again, gave us the bare structure. Loki went down. He went to the dwarves. He found, in particular, a group of dwarves called the Sons of Ivaldi, Sinner in the Old Norse. They were, by every surviving account, among the finest of the dwarven smiths. Their forge was old. Their craft was the kind that had been passed from father to son and son to son for as long as any of them could remember. To go to them was to go to the experts. I want to spend a moment before we follow Loki into their forge, sitting with the picture of Svartalfheim as the Norse imagined it, because the picture is, in its way, one of the most affecting in all of Norse cosmology. Imagine a vast underground country. There is no sky. Where the sky should be, there's rock. The rock is dark, and it is high, and it forms the ceiling of the world. In some places the rock is broken, and small openings let in, far above, the faintest glimpse of starlight from the world above. But these are rare. For the most part, the country is lit by its own light, by the amber glow of forges, by the orange flicker of furnaces, by the patient, steady light of metal being worked. The country is full of sound, hammering, the slow, steady wheeze of bellows, the hiss of metal being quenched in water, the voices of dwarves calling to each other across the great halls, in a language the surface peoples did not always understand. The country has a rhythm. It works. There are no women in the surviving accounts. The dwarves of Svartalfheim are described, in every Norse source I have been able to find, as men. The texts do not tell us how this is possible. They do not tell us how the dwarves reproduce. They simply tell us that the dwarves are who they are, and that they are very many, and that they have been working their craft for as long as anyone in the worlds above has been able to remember. It is a country, in some ways, of nothing but work. This is the world Loki entered. He came, the surviving sources tell us, with a request. He came with the memory of his blood brother son, standing over him, ready to take him apart. He came with the gold of Sif's hair, perhaps, gathered in some fold of his cloak, though the sources do not specify whether he brought the original hair or simply came with the need. He came with what he had to offer the dwarves in exchange. He came, in particular, with his own cunning. Because Loki, by the time he reached the Sons of Ivaldi, had already had time to think. Whatever bargain he struck with them, whatever the dwarves asked for, whatever Loki gave them or promised them, the surviving sources do not specify. Snorri does not tell us what Loki paid. The Sons of Ivaldi, the texts simply say, made the things Loki asked for. They made them well. They made in particular 3 things. They made a head of hair for Sif, real gold, fine as silk, that would attach itself to her head and grow there as if it had always been there. It would, the dwarf said, look like ordinary hair. It would behave like ordinary hair. The only thing about it that would be unordinary was that it would be, in its substance, gold. They made a ship, not an ordinary ship, a ship called Skidbladnir. We will come to it in the next chapter. And they made a spear. The spear was called Gungnir. We met it, in passing, last episode. We will come to it too. But before we look at the 3 gifts of the sons of Ivaldi, we should look at what happened next. Because Loki, having gotten what he came for, did not simply leave Svartalfheim and go home. Loki, having gotten what he came for, did something else. He decided to make a bet. Chapter 6. The Sons of Ivaldi. Before we follow Loki into his bet, we should sit, for the length of this chapter, with the 3 gifts the sons of Ivaldi made, because they are, individually, among the great treasures of Norse mythology, and they will each return in this episode, in later episodes, and in the long arc of the season, in ways that matter. The first gift was the hair for Sif. I have already described it briefly in the last chapter. It was made of true gold. It was fine as silk, finer, perhaps, than any actual hair could be. It was the kind of object that, in the Norse imagination, could only have come from the patient skill of beings who had spent generations learning to draw metal into impossibly thin strands. The sons of Ivaldi, by every surviving account, knew how to do this. But the hair had a quality beyond its substance. When it was placed on Sif's head, the surviving sources tell us it took root. It attached itself to her scalp the way real hair did. It grew. It moved in the wind. It would, the dwarves promised, behave in every way as her own hair had behaved, except that it would be, by its substance, gold. She would, in time, be unable to tell the difference. The people who loved her would be unable to tell the difference. The hair would, by the time it was settled on her head and had grown for a season, simply be her hair. This is, I think, the most quietly remarkable of the gifts. The dwarves had not made a wig. They had not made an ornament. They had made a kind of replacement that, by some craft the Norse imagination did not fully explain, had become indistinguishable from the original. The cruelty Loki had done to Sif could not, in the strict sense, be undone. What is done in time cannot be unmade, but the cruelty could be, in a way the texts allow themselves to believe in, covered over. The gold hair would grow. Sif would have her hair again. The wound, while it would always have happened, would not, after this, be a visible wound. The second gift was a ship. The ship was called Skidbladnir. The name, in Old Norse, means roughly board-bladed or thin-planked. It comes from skid, meaning a thin board or wooden strip, and from blad, meaning a blade or a leaf. The name is descriptive. The ship was, the sources tell us, made of many thin pieces of wood, fitted together with a skill so precise that the seams were nearly invisible. The ship had 3 remarkable qualities, all of which the surviving sources preserve in some detail. The first was its size. Skidbladnir was, when fully extended, the largest ship in the world. It could carry, the sources say, all the gods of Asgard, with all their gear, all their weapons, all their horses, all at once. There was room for everyone. The second was its winds. Skidbladnir, the sources tell us, sailed always with a favorable wind. Whenever the ship's sails were raised, a wind would come to fill them, from the right direction, at the right strength. The ship did not, in the ordinary sense, need to wait for weather. The weather came when the ship needed it. The third was its most remarkable quality. Skidbladnir could be folded. Not folded as in collapsed. Folded as in taken apart into its many thin pieces of wood, and folded together as one might fold a cloth into a small bundle that could be carried in a pouch. The sons of Ivaldi, by every surviving account, had made a ship the size of a great hall that, when not needed, could be carried in a man's hand. This is the kind of detail at which modern readers sometimes pause. Snorri Sturluson did not. He simply told us what the dwarves had made, and let the audience marvel at it as they would. The ship was given, in the eventual distribution of these gifts, to the god Freyr. We will not meet Freyr in detail until later in the season. He is the god of the Vanir, the older order, and he deserves his own episode. Tonight it is enough to know that Skidbladnir went to him, and that he was, in the surviving accounts, much pleased. The third gift was a spear. The spear was called Gungnir. We met Gungnir in the last episode. It is Odin's spear, the spear that never misses. We will not repeat the description here in full. You can return to the last episode if you'd like to sit with that gift again. What is worth noting, in the context of tonight's episode, is that all three of these things, the hair, the ship, the spear, were made by the same dwarves, in the same forge, in what the surviving sources suggest was a single visit. The sons of Ivaldi had, in the time Loki was there, made three things of such craft that any one of them would have been the achievement of a lifetime. They had made them, by all surviving indications, easily. The forge was old. The skill was deep. The work, when it was their work, came out fine. The first gift, the new hair of Sif, was, by some readings of the old text, not exactly hair at all. The Prose Edda, in Snorri's account, calls it gold, drawn into thread so fine that they would grow upon a head, the way hair grew, and would settle when the head moved, and could not be told from real hair by anyone who looked. This is one of the small details that the old sources tend to slip past quickly, but that rewards a listener's attention. Gold that grows, living gold. The dwarves' work was not merely metal, it was metal that had been given, somehow, in their underground forges, a small portion of life. The dwarves' three works, the hair, the ship, the spear, would each, in time, be given to a different god, and each god would find that the gift suited him so precisely it could only have been made for him alone. The hair to Sif, by way of Thor. The ship to Freyr, the god of fruitfulness, who needed the largest of all vessels, and yet could fold it like a cloth into a pocket. The spear to Odin, of which there are stranger things still to say. The sons of Ivaldi, in their underground country, had done in one sitting what most smiths of any kind would not do in a lifetime. Loki took the three gifts. He thanked the dwarves, presumably, in whatever way Loki thanked anyone. He prepared, presumably, to leave Svartalfheim and return to the upper world, where his blood brother's son was waiting to see what he had brought. But Loki, and this is the moment that turns the whole story, did not, after receiving the three gifts, simply leave. He went instead to another forge. There were, in Svartalfheim, many dwarves. The sons of Ivaldi were not, by any means, the only smiths in the underground country. There were others. There were, in particular, two dwarves who were brothers, who had their own forge, who were known, among the dwarves who knew the trade, as smiths whose work was, by some accounts, the rival of the sons of Ivaldi's. Their names were Sindri, sometimes called Atri, and Brokkr. Loki, with the three gifts of the sons of Ivaldi already in his keeping, went to find them. The reason he went is the substance of the next chapter. The reason he went is, though Loki himself may not have known it at the time, the reason this entire episode exists. We meet the brothers now. Chapter 7, The Wager, Loki bets his head, Sindri and Brokkr. These are the two names that, by the end of the Norse mythological corpus, are bound up forever with the hammer of Thor. Without them, without the strange brothers, working in their forge somewhere in the deep underground of Svartalfheim, there would be no Mjolnir, the hammer that defended Asgard against the giants, that called down lightning in the surviving stories, that returned to the thrower's hand, that was the great weapon of the Norse cosmos, would not, in the Norse imagination, exist. Sindri and Brokkr are the reason it does. A brief note on the names before we go further. Snorri Sturluson, in chapter 35 of his Skaldskaparmal, the chapter that is our principal source for this whole story, gives the brother's name as Atri. Atri. The word in Old Norse means, roughly, poison worker or the venomous one, though the meaning is debated. Other sources in the surviving Norse corpus, including the Eddic poem Hyndlul and certain references in the Völuspá, give the same figure as Sindri, Sindri, a name that may relate to cinder or spark. The scholarly consensus today is that Sindri and Atri are two names for the same dwarf, and that the Norse tradition itself did not always settle which name was canonical. I will, for clarity, use Sindri in tonight's narration, but you should know, if you read the original sources, that Atri is the same dwarf, working at the same forge, on the same gifts. Brokkr, by all surviving accounts, is the second brother, the Bellows man, the one who does, in the story to come, most of the physical work. The name in Old Norse means, roughly, badger. Whether this is meant as a description of his appearance, or his temperament, or his way of moving, the sources do not specify. Loki came to their forge. The surviving accounts do not describe the forge in detail. We are left to imagine it. A stone room probably, a hearth at one end, glowing amber, a long iron anvil, bellows worked by hand, heaps of raw metal, gold, iron, silver, stacked along the walls. The two brothers, working in the close concentration that all skilled craft requires, in the long low light. Loki entered, the texts tell us. He praised, in passing, the things the sons of Ivaldi had just made for him. He may have shown the brothers the gifts. The accounts are not specific. What is consistent is the central act. Loki, having received 3 treasures from one group of dwarves, came to a second group of dwarves and proposed a contest. He said, and I am paraphrasing, because Snorri does not give us the exact dialogue, I do not believe you brothers can make 3 gifts as fine as the gifts I have just received from the sons of Ivaldi. He said this knowing, perhaps, that the brothers had a reputation. He said this perhaps because he wanted to see what would happen. He said this perhaps because Loki was Loki, and the chance to set one set of dwarves against another set of dwarves was the kind of thing he found, in his nature, irresistible. The brothers, as Loki may or may not have predicted, took the bait. Brokkr, the surviving sources tell us, replied immediately. He said, in essence, we can do better. My brother can do better. We can make 3 gifts that will make the sons of Ivaldi look like apprentices. Loki said, very well. I will bet you that you cannot. Brokkr asked what he was willing to wager. This is the moment that, more than any other in the story, marks Loki as the figure he is, because a more cautious being, and almost every being in the Norse mythological corpus was a more cautious being than Loki, would have wagered something small, something concrete, some piece of gold he could afford to lose, some object whose loss would not, by any reasonable measure, be ruinous. Loki instead wagered his head. The surviving phrase in Old Norse is unambiguous. Loki vejadi höfti sinu. Loki wagered his head. If the brothers could not make 3 gifts finer than the gift of the sons of Ivaldi, Loki said he would keep his head. If they could, if the brothers' work was judged by the gods of Asgard to be greater than the sons of Ivaldi's, then the brothers could have Loki's head to do with as they pleased. We should sit here for a moment with the strangeness of what Loki has just done. He has wagered his head, not, as we sometimes hear the phrase used today, as a manner of speaking. He has actually, in the literal terms of the surviving story, said, "If these brothers make a better thing than the sons of Ivaldi, you may take my head from my shoulders." And the brothers have accepted. The work will be done. And at the end of it, 3 gifts will be judged against 3 gifts, and 1 wager will be lost, and 1 head will be taken. This is the kind of thing that, in the Norse stories, happens often enough that we should pay attention to it. The wager that is too high, the bet that should not have been offered, the oath that, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. The Norse gods, in the surviving sources, are again and again caught by these, by promises they regret, by terms they did not think through, by a single careless word that locks the world into a path it cannot leave. The old poet seemed to have felt, on this matter, that the world ran on these moments, that every great story turned on a single ill-considered yes. Why? The surviving sources do not give us a clear answer. Loki had no obvious need to make such an extreme bet. He could have wagered a piece of gold, or a season's worth of work, or any one of 1,000 smaller things. He wagered his head. Some scholars have read this as evidence of Loki's deep confidence in the sons of Ivaldi. He had just seen their work. He had carried their 3 gifts in his arms. He could not, in his own assessment, imagine that any other dwarves could surpass them. The wager, in this reading, was the wager of a man who believed he could not lose. Others have read it differently. Some have suggested that Loki, in his nature, was simply drawn to extremity, that the chance to wager nothing of importance would have bored him, that only by wagering his head could he make the contest feel real. Still others, and this is the reading I find most affecting, have suggested that Loki, on some level, was always a being who wanted to be punished, that across the long arc of the surviving Norse stories, Loki kept doing things that would, eventually, lead to his own undoing, that the wager of his head was, in some submerged way, an early instance of the pattern. Loki was, in this reading, always heading toward the cave. The cave was, in some sense, what he was for. The wagers, the cruelties, the descents. They were the steps along the road. You may choose whichever reading you prefer. The Norse texts, as ever, let several be true at once. What the texts do agree on, in full clarity, is what the brothers did. Brokkr accepted the wager. The brothers, by every surviving account, began to work immediately. They piled fuel into the forge. They worked the bellows. They drew out the raw metal they would be using for the first of their 3 gifts. They moved, in the practiced rhythm of long craft, to their stations. And Loki, having staked his head on what was about to be made, settled down to watch, or so he pretended. In the next chapter, we will see what Loki actually did. Chapter 8, The Fly at the Bellows. I want to read you, slowly, the central passage of the story, because what happens in this chapter is, in some ways, the heart of the whole Norse tradition's account of how Mjolnir was made, and the surviving Old Norse text is unusually direct in its telling. Loki, having wagered his head, sat down in the brothers' forge. Sindri began the work. He placed on the fire a pigskin, the source material for the first of his 3 gifts. He turned to his brother Brokkr and said, in the surviving paraphrase, "Pump the bellows. Do not stop pumping the bellows. Whatever happens, do not stop. If you stop, all the work is lost." Brokkr began to pump. Sindri left the forge briefly to fetch something. Whether he was gone for long, the texts do not specify. While he was away, the work continued. Brokkr at the bellows, in the rhythm of long craft, the pigskin in the fire, the amber heat building. And then, and here Snorri's text is, in the surviving original, unusually direct. Then a fly flew onto Brokkr's hand and stung him. The fly was Loki. That is the text. Suvar Loki. The fly was Loki. Snorri does not allow the reader any ambiguity. He does not write say the fly was Loki, or it was rumored that Loki had taken the form of a fly. He simply tells us, in the bare voice of his prose, that this was what Loki had done. Loki, who had wagered his own head on the contest, had taken the form of a fly and entered the forge, and was now actively trying to sabotage the work. This is, I think, one of the strangest moments in all of Norse mythology. The figure who has bet his own head is the same figure who is trying to make sure he loses the bet. The being who, by every rational calculus, should be wanting the brothers to fail, should be doing nothing, should be sitting on his hands, should be hoping that the brothers' work crack apart in the flames, is the one taking active measures to ensure the brothers cannot succeed. The texts do not explain this contradiction directly. They simply let it stand. Loki is Loki, and Loki, in his nature, does not always act in the way his interests would dictate. Loki sometimes simply acts in the way that produces the most interesting story. The Prose Edda's telling of this moment is one of the small comic masterpieces in the whole of Norse literature. The trickster, with his head wagered, with his life literally on the line, with the work going against him, and his only weapon in the underground forge of the dwarves is to become an insect, to become small enough that Brokkr cannot easily kill him, to bite and bite and bite again, in the hope that one of the bites will land in the wrong place at the wrong moment and the work will go wrong. The image, Loki as a fly, circling the head of a sweating dwarf at the bellows of a fire that is making the most powerful object ever to exist in the Norse cosmos, is the sort of image that the modern reader sometimes laughs at. And the laughter is, I think, intended. The Norse poets had a sense of humor about their own gods that the modern reader sometimes underestimates. The trickster brought low, the cosmic stakes, balanced on the head of an insect. The dwarf, who has been forging for hours, finally pausing for one moment to wave away the irritation. And in that single pause, in that single moment of distraction, the hammer's handle came out shorter than it should have. The whole long history of Mjolnir's short handle begins with that fly bite. The fly stung Brokkr's hand. Brokkr did not, the texts tell us, stop pumping. The sting was painful. The pain went through his hand, up his arm, into the muscle of his shoulder. But he had been told by his brother that whatever happened, he should not stop. So he did not stop. Sindri returned to the forge. He looked at the work. He took from the fire the first of the 3 gifts. It was, the texts tell us, a boar made entirely of gold, bristles, hide, tusks, eyes. Every part of it, gold. The boar was called Gullinbursti. Gold bristled. Gullinbursti. We will come to it in detail in the next chapter. Sindri then turned to his brother again. Now we make the second gift, he said. He placed on the fire gold itself, raw gold. He told Brokkr again, in the same words, pump the bellows. Do not stop, whatever happens. If you stop, all the work is lost. Brokkr began again. The fly came back. This time the fly stung Brokkr's neck. The sting was, by Snorri's own phrase, half again as hard as the first. Halfu fastari in the Old Norse, the kind of careful comparative ratio the Norse texts like to put on physical pain. The pain went down into Brokkr's shoulder, into his back, into the muscle between his shoulder blades. But Brokkr did not stop pumping. He had been told. He kept the rhythm. Sindri returned. He looked at the work. He took from the fire the second of the three gifts. It was a ring, a great gold arm ring with, though Brokkr did not know it yet, a quality that would make it one of the most coveted objects in Asgard. The ring was called Draupnir, the Dripper. We met it last episode. We will come back to it in the next chapter. Sindri then turned to his brother for the third time. The third gift would be the most demanding, he said. The third gift would be the one that, if completed, would win them the wager. He placed on the fire iron, a great mass of iron. He told Brokkr, this time more urgently than before, pump the bellows. Do not stop. Above all, on this one, do not stop. If you stop, even for an instant, the gift will be ruined. Brokkr began. The fly came back. This time the fly stung Brokkr's eyelid. The bite, the surviving texts tell us, was the hardest of all. The blood came immediately. It ran down from Brokkr's eyelid, into his eye, blinding it. He could not see. Blood was pouring into his vision. The fly was still on his eyelid, biting again. Brokkr, who had been told again and again that he must not stop, let go of the bellows for an instant, only an instant, long enough to lift his hand to his face and wipe the blood from his eye. Then he returned to the bellows. He kept pumping. But Sindri, when he came back to take the third gift from the fire, looked at it and frowned. The third gift was a hammer. The head of the hammer was, by every surviving account, perfect. The metal was the finest dark iron the dwarves knew how to work. The shape was the perfect shape for what the hammer would need to do. The weight was the correct weight. The balance was the correct balance. But the handle of the hammer was short. Shorter than Sindri had intended. Shorter, the surviving accounts tell us, than any normal hammer's handle would have been. The handle was short. The sources are explicit about why. Because of that one brief moment when Brokkr had stopped pumping the bellows. The instant when the metal had cooled, just slightly. The instant when, in the patient long heat of forging, the metal had not been quite hot enough to take the full length of the handle. The handle was short. Sindri was, the surviving accounts tell us, deeply unhappy about this. He looked at his brother. He saw the blood. He understood, in the way two long-working craftsmen come to understand each other without speaking, that something had happened. He did not, in the surviving texts, blame Brokkr directly. He simply observed that the hammer's handle was shorter than he had wanted, and, though he could not have known it then, that the imperfection would, in the end, become part of the legend. The hammer was called Mjolnir. We will come to it in detail in the next chapter. We will come to its qualities, its weight, its return, its small concealability, in the chapter after that. But for now, let me leave you with the image. The forge in the deep, the amber light, the brothers, one with blood on his cheek, the other looking down at the 3 gifts laid on the cooling stone. And somewhere, perhaps still in the forge, perhaps already gone, a fly, on whose head, in some way the dwarves did not yet know, the entire wager would now turn. Loki, who had bet his head, and who had spent the bet itself trying to lose it, slipped back to his own form, somewhere in the dark. He gathered his things. He prepared to go up. He took the 3 gifts of the sons of Ivaldi. He took the 3 gifts of Sindri and Brokkr, and he made his way, the surviving accounts suggest, back up the long roads of Svartalfheim, toward the surface, toward Asgard, toward the judgment that he knew was waiting. He had, by his own assessment, won the bet. The brothers' work was good, but the hammer had a short handle. The hair, the ship, the spear of the sons of Ivaldi were each perfect in their own way. The brothers' work, while striking, had a visible flaw. He may have been smiling as he climbed. He did not yet know what the gods would decide. Chapter 9. Gullinbursti and Draupnir. I want to slow down in this chapter and sit with the first 2 of the brothers' 3 gifts, because they are, in their own right, 2 of the more remarkable objects in Norse mythology, and they have, in the surviving stories, lives of their own that extend far past the moment of their making. The first is the golden boar, Gullinbursti. The name in Old Norse means, literally, gold-bristled. Gull, gold, bursti, bristle. The boar's distinguishing feature is that every bristle of its coat, every hair on its body, is made of true gold. The whole animal, in the surviving accounts, shines. This shining is not, in the Norse imagination, ornamental. The shining is functional. The boar, the surviving sources tell us, gives off its own light. Wherever it goes, the gold of its bristles glows, the way burning coals glow, and the darkness around it lifts. The boar can run through the deepest of nights and create, around itself, a small moving zone of illumination. A traveler riding the boar would never, in the surviving Norse imagination, lack for light. The boar has other qualities. It can run, the texts tell us, faster than any horse. It can run through air. It can run on water, the surface, not under. It is, in the long view, a creature whose nature is to move at speed, in any element, in any condition, with its own light. Gullinbursti was given, in the eventual distribution of the gifts, to the god Freyr. We mentioned him briefly in the last chapter. He is the god of the Vanir, the other order of gods, and we will meet him in proper detail later in this season. For now it is enough to know that the boar went to Freyr, and that Freyr, who was, in the surviving accounts, much pleased, kept it as one of his principal companions. Whenever Freyr traveled, the boar traveled with him. Whenever Freyr needed light, the boar gave it. The boar appears, in the surviving Norse poems, in scenes you may not yet have read, but if you continue with this season, you will encounter it again. There is a famous funeral scene, late in the season's arc, in which Freyr arrives at the pyre of a fallen god in a wagon drawn by Gullinbursti, the boar's own light moving across the dark gathering of mourners. The boar is, in the surviving corpus, one of the small recurring figures whose presence the poets like to note. Gullinbursti was there. The light moved with him. The second gift is the ring, Draupnir. We met it last episode. I will not, here, repeat the description in full. What is worth noting, in the context of tonight's episode, is the surrounding circumstance. The ring was made by Sindri and Brokkr in the same forge, in the same single sitting in which they made the boar and the hammer. The ring was the second of the three. The fly, Loki, stung Brokkr's neck during the working of it, and Brokkr did not stop pumping the bellows. The ring came out, the surviving sources tell us, perfect. Draupnir, you may recall, was a great gold arm ring of the kind a chieftain would wear on his upper arm. Its distinguishing quality was that every 9th night, 8 identical gold arm rings dripped from it. The wealth of the ring was, in principle, inexhaustible. A king who wore Draupnir could give and never empty his hoard. The ring was given, in the eventual distribution of the gifts, to Odin, the All-Father, the Wanderer, the figure who, in the surviving stories, was the principal ring-giver of the gods, the patron of every chieftain in the human world who held an open hand. Draupnir, in Odin's keeping, became a kind of emblem of the office of leadership itself. To be a true leader, in the Old Norse imagination, was to be the kind of being from whom gold could be expected to flow. Odin kept Draupnir. The ring appears, in the surviving stories, on several occasions, including, with particular weight, in a funeral scene we will arrive at much later in the season, in which Odin lays the ring on a fallen god's pyre, and the ring is sent down with the body, and is, the texts tell us, given back to Odin sometime later, by means I will not spoil here. The ring is a recurring object. It has a life. I want to note something about the pattern of the gifts before we move on to the hammer in the next chapter. The 2 gifts we have just discussed, Gullinbursti and Draupnir, were given eventually to 2 different gods. The boar went to Freyr. The ring went to Odin. The 3rd gift, the hammer, would go to Thor. 3 gifts, 3 gods, one for each of the 3 principal male powers of the surviving Norse pantheon: the god of fertility, the god of wisdom, the god of thunder. This is, scholars have long noted, not an accident. The surviving sources in their structure were arranging the gifts in such a way that the 3 great male gods of Asgard each received an object suited to their particular nature. Freyr, the god of harvest, of fertility, of golden things growing in fields, received the golden boar that ran through the air and gave its own light. Odin, the god of wisdom, of long roads, of the open hand, received the ring that gave and gave. Thor, the god of thunder, of direct force, of the defense of Asgard, received in due time the hammer. Each god got the object he was best suited to wield. Draupnir, the ring, is worth pausing on for a moment longer. The name, in the Old Norse, means the dripper, or, in a slightly different reading, that which drips. It is one of the rare objects in Norse mythology, whose name is, itself, a description of what the object does. Every 9th night, the Prose Edda tells us, 8 rings of equal weight and equal beauty drop from it, every 9th night, without ceasing. The ring was, in effect, a self-replicating source of wealth, a perpetual fountain of gold in the form of more rings. The reader of the modern world may find this absurd. The reader of the medieval North, who lived in a world where wealth was a thing you could weigh, and where rings were one of the standard forms in which it was carried, would have understood it as a deeply serious image. A king with Draupnir on his finger could, in 9 months, become richer than any other king who had ever lived. The ring, in the surviving sources, was buried with the god Baldur at his funeral, placed on his pyre as the boat burned. The story later of Hermod's ride to the underworld to retrieve it is one of the saddest in the whole of the Norse corpus. But that story, tonight, is not ours. Tonight we have one more gift left to forge. In the next chapter, we come to the hammer itself. We come to Mjolnir. Chapter 10, The Making of Mjolnir. The hammer was made, as we said in the previous chapter, in the same forge, in the same single sitting in which the brothers made the boar and the ring. The hammer was the third and final gift. It was the one Brokkr had been told, most urgently of all, that he must not stop pumping for. It was the one the fly bit Brokkr's eyelid during, and the blood ran into his eye, and he stopped, for just an instant, to wipe his face. The hammer came out of the fire with a short handle. I want to spend most of this chapter sitting with the hammer itself, with its properties, with its qualities, with what it meant to the Norse imagination, because Mjolnir is, by some distance, the most famous of all the objects in Norse mythology. It is the object that, more than any other, has survived into the modern world. You can buy a small replica of it today in any airport shop in Reykjavik and from many shops in the world far from there. The hammer of Thor has, in its way, outlived even the religion that produced it. What did the dwarves make? They made a tool of dark iron. The head of the hammer was, the surviving sources tell us, square, though some accounts describe it as more rounded, like a maul. The metal was, by every account, the finest dark iron the dwarves knew. The weight of the head was such that no being in Asgard but Thor could lift it. Thor's strength, in the surviving descriptions, was specifically the strength required to swing the hammer. The hammer demanded a god of his particular kind to be useful at all. The hammer had a name, Mjolnir. The etymology of the name is, even today, contested. Some scholars derive it from a verb meaning to crush or to grind, mala in some forms, and so read the name as crusher or grinder. Others derive it from a root meaning lightning or flash, related to words for sudden white light in some of the older Indo-European languages. Still others have proposed that the name is older than any of these readings, that it comes from a time before the Old Norse language existed in its surviving form, and that we can only guess what it once meant. What is consistent is that, in the surviving Norse use of the word, Mjolnir is the hammer's proper name. It is treated, in the text, the way the name of a person is treated. The hammer is referred to, again and again, as if it had a personality of its own. The hammer had three principal qualities. The surviving sources are clear about all three. The first was its strike. Mjolnir, the texts tell us, could strike as hard as Thor wished it to strike, against any substance, any creature, any obstacle, and the hammer would not break, not on the bones of the largest giant, not on the stones of the deepest mountain, not on the shell of the great serpent that lived under the world sea. Mjolnir was, in this sense, indestructible. Whatever Thor swung the hammer at, the hammer would either pass through, or the hammer would shatter, and the hammer never shattered. Therefore the thing struck always gave way. This was the simple math of the weapon. The second was its return. Mjolnir, the surviving sources tell us, could be thrown. The hammer, when thrown, would strike whatever Thor had aimed it at, striking with the same impossible force, breaking whatever needed to be broken. And then, after striking, the hammer would return to Thor's hand. There was no need to retrieve it. There was no need to walk over to the corpse of the giant and pull the hammer out. The hammer simply came back, as if it knew the way home. This is a more remarkable quality than it sometimes seems. In the long history of mythological weapons across the world's traditions, the returning weapon is rare. Most weapons in mythology, once thrown, must be retrieved. The Norse, in giving Thor a hammer that returned of its own accord, were giving him a weapon that could be used again and again in rapid succession against multiple enemies. The hammer was, in this respect, the perfect weapon for a god who would be fighting alone in distant places against many. The third quality was the most surprising. Mjolnir, the surviving sources tell us, could be made small enough that Thor could tuck it inside his tunic, under his cloak, against his chest. The hammer could become, in this concealed form, the size of a pendant. It could be hidden completely. Thor could walk through any hall, any settlement, any human village, with the hammer on him, and no one would know. This, too, is a more remarkable quality than it sometimes seems. The hammer, in the modern imagination, in the comic books, in the films, is a great visible object, a thing always present in Thor's grip. The Norse imagination, by contrast, gave Thor a hammer that could disappear. The god, in the surviving stories, could move through the world without the weight of the weapon being apparent. He could arrive in a hall as a stranger. He could sit by a peasant's fire as a guest. He could pass through a giant's gate as a merchant. And only when the situation required it, only when the moment came for the hammer to be drawn, would the hammer appear, full-sized, in his hand. This quality, scholars have noted, is one of the reasons Thor figures so often in the Eddic poems, in stories of disguise and infiltration. The hammer, being concealable, made the god, in some sense, mobile. He could go where he wanted to go, in any form, and still be, at any moment, what he was. And then there was the imperfection. The handle was short. The surviving sources are explicit about why this mattered. Mjolnir's short handle meant, in the text language, that Thor could not, when swinging it, get the full leverage that a longer handle would have given him. He had to grip the hammer close to his body. He had to swing it with the strength of his arm, rather than the leverage of a long shaft. The short handle made the hammer, in this respect, slightly less than what it could have been. But here is the strange thing. It did not, in any surviving account, prevent Thor from doing what he needed to do. The hammer's short handle is referenced throughout the Norse corpus, mainly as a curiosity. The dwarves regret it. Sindri, when the gift is presented in Asgard, mentions it. Brokkr is, in some surviving accounts, blamed for it. But Thor, in the surviving texts, does not seem to mind. He takes the hammer. He grips it where the handle is. He swings it. It strikes what he wants it to strike. It returns to his hand. It becomes small when he asks it to become small. The flaw, in the end, is more of a story than a problem. This is, I think, one of the quietly affecting things about the whole story of Mjolnir's making. The hammer is, by every objective measure, one of the great achievements of the Norse mythological imagination. It is the weapon that defends the world. It is the tool by which the gods hold the giants at bay. It is the object whose presence, in the long arc of the surviving stories, is the difference between continued existence and the early arrival of Ragnarok. And it has a short handle. The flaw is part of the gift. The gift is not less for having a flaw. The flaw, in some sense, is what makes the gift it became. A hammer that, by the text's own account, was both perfect and imperfect at the same time. And that was, in any case, the greatest weapon any of the gods had ever held. A note on the name. The most likely origin of Mjolnir, by the most thorough modern philological work, is from an old Indo-European root meaning to grind or to crush, the same root that gives us the modern English word mill, and the German mail for flour, and the Latin malleus for hammer. Mjolnir, in this reading, is the crusher, the thing that grinds, the instrument of the great mill that turns the seasons, that breaks open the storm cloud, that strikes down whatever stands across its path. The connection between the hammer and the agricultural mill is older, perhaps, than any of the stories we are telling tonight. Thor was, in the original old farmer's worship, the god of the field as much as he was the god of the storm. The same hammer that broke the giant skulls was the hammer that blessed the bride at a wedding, that blessed the field at sowing, that blessed the harvest at the year's turn. The hammer was, for the old Scandinavian farmer who carved a small Mjolnir shape on a pendant and hung it on a leather cord around his neck, of which the archaeological record has preserved over 1,000 examples across Scandinavia and the British Isles. Not a weapon. It was a protector, a small piece of the storm god, carried at the throat against whatever the night might bring. We turn now to the moment when the gifts are brought back to Asgard and the gods sit down to judge them. Chapter 11. The Judgment of the Gods. The surviving sources tell us that the brothers Sindri and Brokkr followed Loki up out of Svartalfheim. They brought their 3 gifts with them. Loki brought the 3 gifts of the sons of Ivaldi. The whole party, by the time it reached Asgard, was a procession. A trickster, 2 dwarves, 6 treasures. They came to the gods. The judgment, the surviving sources tell us, was to be made by 3 specific gods: Odin, the Allfather; Thor, the strongest; Freyr, the god of the Vanir, who had joined the Aesir's company after the war between the 2 divine families. These 3 sat in their high judgment seats, the texts tell us, and the gifts were laid out before them, and the dwarves and the trickster waited to hear how the gods would decide. The first set of gifts was the work of the sons of Ivaldi. Sif's hair was presented. Skidbladnir was presented, folded perhaps into a small bundle of wood the size of a piece of cloth, and unfolded for the gods to its full size. Gungnir was presented. The gods looked at the 3. They were pleased. Each gift, in its own way, was a wonder. The hair, when laid on Sif's head, immediately took root and began to grow as ordinary hair grew. She wept again, the text suggests, but the weeping this time was different. The weeping of a being who has had a wrong made right, rather than of a being who has had a wrong inflicted. The ship, when unfolded, was as large as the text had promised, and the gods could see that it would carry all of them with their gear. The spear, when balanced in Odin's hand, felt to him, the text suggests, though they do not give us Odin's exact words, like a continuation of his own arm. The sons of Ivaldi had made fine things. Then the brothers Sindri and Brokkr presented their 3 gifts. Gullinbursti was led out. The boar, the surviving accounts tell us, was put on its feet on the floor of the hall, and the light from its gold bristles immediately filled the space around it. The gods marveled. Freyr, who would receive it, was particularly pleased. The boar, the dwarves said, would run faster than any horse, through air or over water, and would always give its own light. Draupnir was placed in Odin's other hand. The gods watched it. The dwarves explained its property, that every 9th night, 8 identical rings would drip from it. Odin, the texts tell us, ran his thumb along the edge of the ring and felt the weight of it and was, the texts suggest, in the careful way they had of suggesting Odin's feelings without naming them, moved. And then Mjolnir. The brothers brought the hammer forward. They laid it on the long table at which the gods sat. They told the gods what the hammer was. They told the gods, with some embarrassment, that the handle was shorter than they had intended. They explained, in the surviving accounts, why this had happened. A fly had stung Brokkr's eyelid during the forging, and Brokkr had stopped pumping the bellows for an instant to wipe the blood from his eye, and the handle had emerged shorter than the design had called for. The gods looked at the hammer. Thor, for whom the gift was intended, picked it up. He felt the weight of it. He felt the balance. He gripped it where the dwarves had made the grip, close to the head. He swung it gently in the air of the hall, and the hall, the surviving accounts tell us, vibrated faintly with each swing, the way the air vibrates when a great bell is rung, but the sound has not yet escaped. The three judges conferred. The conversation, in detail, is not preserved, but the outcome is, the three gods, Odin, Thor, Freyr, declared unanimously that the hammer was the greatest of the 6 gifts, not because it was the most beautiful, not because it was the most ingenious, but because, in their judgment, it was the gift that would matter most in the long defense of Asgard. Their reasoning, the surviving texts give us, was simple. The world of the gods was surrounded on all sides by the world of the giants. The giants would, at some unknown future moment, come against Asgard in numbers no other god's weapon could resist. The hammer, the indestructible, returning, concealable hammer, was the only object among the 6 that could, in the long view, hold the giants back. The ship was beautiful. The hair was a wonder. The boar gave its light. The ring gave its gold. The spear in Odin's hand was a marker of fate. But the hammer was, in the gods' assessment, the difference between Asgard's continued existence and its end. The hammer was the greatest gift. Therefore the brothers Sindri and Brokkr had, by the gods' unanimous verdict, won the wager. Loki had lost. Brokkr, the surviving texts tell us, immediately stepped forward. He was, by every account, a dwarf of strong feeling. The fly had stung him 3 times. He had pumped the bellows through pain and blood. He had been told by his brother that the work demanded everything of him, and he had given everything. And now Loki had lost the bet Loki himself had proposed. And Brokkr had come to collect what he had been promised. He had come, the surviving texts tell us, for Loki's head. We come, in the final chapter before Goodnight, to what Loki did then. Chapter 12. Goodnight and the hammer at rest. Loki, when he saw the verdict, did what Loki always did. He looked for a way out. He did not, in the surviving accounts, try to deny the verdict. The judgment had been unanimous. The 3 gods had spoken. The brothers had won. By the terms of the bet, the terms Loki himself had set, Loki's head was now forfeit. Brokkr was entitled, in the harsh law of the old Norse wager, to take it. But Loki, and this is the moment that, more than any other, defines his cunning, found, in the wording of the bet, a small crack. He turned to the gods, the surviving sources tell us, and he said, "I wagered my head. I did not wager my neck. The brothers may have my head, but they may not have my neck." The gods looked at him. The cunning of the argument is, in its old Norse form, sharper than it sometimes seems in modern paraphrase. Loki was pointing out that one cannot remove a head without cutting the neck. The two are joined. The head, in any literal sense, includes the upper portion of the neck. To take the head is, necessarily, to take part of the neck. But Loki had only wagered the head. The neck, even the small portion of neck through which a beheading must pass, was not, by the strict terms, his to give. If Brokkr cut into the neck, Brokkr would be taking something he had not won. The gods, the surviving texts tell us, considered this. The argument was, in the Old Norse legal sense, sound. Loki had identified a real ambiguity in the terms. The wager, as it had been stated, did not give Brokkr the right to cut into the neck. And there was, in the strict logic, no way to take the head without doing so. Therefore, Brokkr could not, by the god's judgment, have what he had won. The god sided with Loki. I want you to sit with this for a moment, because it is one of the more affecting passages in the Norse corpus. Loki had done a real wrong. He had cut Sif's hair. He had taunted the brothers. He had wagered his head and lost. And now, in the moment the consequence was meant to come down on him, he found, in the precise language of his own wager, a wriggle. And the gods let him have it. Why? The surviving sources do not, I think, fully answer this. Several readings have been offered. Some scholars have suggested that the gods, in this moment, were not yet ready to let one of their own be put to death over a craft contest. That the relation between the Aesir and Loki, complicated and ambiguous as it was not something they wished to dissolve over the technicality of a bet. Others have suggested that the gods admired the cunning of the argument itself, that the Norse Old Law tradition placed a real value on the kind of sharp parsing Loki had just done, and that to deny him his wriggle would have been to deny the rules of their own legal system. Still others have suggested, more darkly, that the gods knew Loki would, eventually, do worse, and that letting him off this once, in this small way, was the cost of keeping him close enough to watch. Whatever the reason, the gods sided with Loki. Brokkr could not take the head. We should sit with this for a moment. This is, exactly, the sort of argument that the Trickster, in nearly every mythology in the world, makes. The letter of the agreement, held up against the spirit of the agreement, the literal word, used against the meaning. The Norse poets, in their old way, seem to have admired this kind of legal cunning even when it offended them. They preserved many such moments. Figures wriggling out of impossible bargains by finding the small unsaid clause, the loophole, the technicality. Loki was, in this single way, the patron of every clever lawyer who has ever stood in any court, anywhere, since the world began. The Norse legal imagination, even outside of the mythological texts, took these wrigglings seriously. The Icelandic Gragas law codes, written down in the centuries after the conversion to Christianity, are full of careful parsings of exactly this kind. What was promised, in the exact words, what was withheld, by silence, where the boundary of an oath ran, when the oath had been spoken in a hurry. The Norse, in their long Atlantic settlement, lived in a world where the precise word of an agreement could mean the difference between life and exile. Loki's argument in the story would have been read by a Norse audience, not as cheating, but as a particularly fine specimen of the art they all practiced. He had read the contract, he had found the gap, he had walked through it, and the gods, who lived by the same law, could not, in justice, refuse him the walk. Brokkr was, by every surviving account, angry. He had been promised something, and the something was being withheld, and the withholding was, by the strict logic of the law, sound. He could not protest the verdict, but he could do something else. He could not take Loki's head, but he could, the surviving accounts tell us, sew Loki's lips shut. This is the strange compromise the story records. Brokkr drew out, the surviving texts mention it by name, and all. The all was called Vartari. The Old Norse word may relate to verd, meaning watch or guard. The etymology is debated, but the all itself is named, in the text, as if it were a person. Brokkr took Vartari, the surviving sources tell us, and he punched holes through Loki's lips. He drew through the holes a strong leather thread. He sewed Loki's lips shut, one stitch after another, while Loki, who could not, in the moment, refuse, since the alternative was the loss of his head, stood and let it be done. When the work was finished, Brokkr took the dwarf brothers' farewell of Asgard and went back down to Svartalfheim. Loki, the surviving texts tell us, eventually tore the thread out of his lips. He was, of course, capable of doing so. The thread was leather, and the lips of a god are not so different from the lips of a man. He was, after the tearing, free to speak again. But the surviving Norse imagination, for the rest of the corpus, treated this as a marking. Loki had been silenced once for the work he had done. The silencing did not last, but it had happened. The trickster who had cut a goddess's hair had, in turn, his own mouth sealed. The Norse, in their long view, kept this in mind. The hammer, Mjolnir, appears in many later Norse stories beyond this one. It is the hammer Thor used, again and again, to defend Asgard from the giants who threatened it. It is the hammer he raised in one of the surviving Eddic poems, Thrymsk Vida, the Lay of Thrym, to retrieve it from the giant Thrym who had stolen it, in a story that ends, hilariously, with Thor in a bride's dress. It is the hammer that, in the prophecy of Ragnarok, he will use to kill the great serpent Jormungandr at the world's end, and after which he will himself, the prophecy tells us, walk 9 steps and fall. But all of those stories are for other nights. Tonight, the hammer is new. The forge has gone cold. The dwarves have been paid and have returned to their underground halls. Sif has her hair back. Loki has his mouth back. Sometime later, when the threads loosened and he could speak again, though the poets do not record exactly when. The gods of Asgard have their treasures, and Thor, the red-bearded one, the strongest of the gods, the one who stood between the world of men and whatever lay beyond it, has, at his belt, a hammer with a slightly short handle and a power that no being in any of the 9 worlds could match. It is enough. It will do. In the long arc of the surviving stories, across the rest of this season, and across every Norse story we have not yet told, Loki's cruelty would grow. He would do worse things than cutting Sif's hair. He would do worse things than betting his head, and the gods who had let him wriggle out of his head bet once would not, in the end, let him wriggle out of the consequences forever. But that is the long arc of the stories. Tonight is not the night for it. Tonight, the hammer is in Thor's hand. Sif's hair has grown back, gold and fine, on her head, and she is, by the surviving text account, consoled. The gods of Asgard have, by the strange accident of Loki's cruelty and Loki's wriggle, gained 5 great treasures and 1 weapon. The world is, for the moment, safer than it was the day before. The dwarves are back in their forge. Loki is back among the gods, silent for a time, then speaking again. And the hammer, the short-handled hammer, the hammer the fly almost ruined, the hammer that would, in the long view, hold off the end of the world, is at rest by Thor's side. You may, sometime in the coming nights, want to come back. The Almanac will be here. Episode 4 is coming next. It is the story of a wolf the gods could not defeat by force, a wolf they had to bind through cunning, and a god, not Thor, not Loki, not Odin, who paid in his own body to make the binding hold. That story comes next. It will be here, on the same schedule, new episodes, Wednesdays and Sundays, at 8 p.m. Eastern. For tonight, you have done enough. The wind in the trees is doing what the wind has always done. The night is doing what the night does. The almanac is moving slowly. The hammer is at rest. Thor is in his hall. Sif is in her hall. Loki, well, Loki is somewhere, doing what Loki does. Let the breath slow. Let the shoulders drop. Let what remains of the day go to the same long darkness in which the dwarves' work is, even now, being carried on, in forges we cannot see, by hands we will not meet. The almanac will continue. The next chapter of the season will arrive in its time. For tonight, the work of the day is finished. Good night. Sleep well. The sleeping almanac will be here when you come back.